Okay, welcome to this session. My name is Diane Parton, and I will be serving as the host, meaning that I'll be helping behind the scenes. Becca Ortiz is assisting me as co-host, and as moderator, she'll be monitoring the chat in case there are any questions that you may have for our presenter, Jordan Smelly. This session is being recorded. If you would like to keep your anonymity in the recording, please turn off your camera and change your Zoom name. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few quick housekeeping announcements before turning it over to the speakers. Please keep your microphone on mute unless you are directed to unmute it. It is very important that attendees stay muted to minimize background noise. Please feel free to keep your camera on or turn it off. Having your camera on will help us feel like we're in the room together. If you have questions about the presentation, please enter those in the chat box. And Becca will be monitoring those and present them to Jordan. If you have a question during the Q&A session, please come off mute, and the moderator will keep an eye on the chat and direct the questions to the presenter at the end of his presentation. After the session, please visit this session's profile under the All Sessions to fill out the session survey on the right-hand side of the page. We really appreciate your feedback about these sessions. And remember that after the session ends, the Zoom meeting will close and you will go back to the Attendee Hub to attend your next session. You received the link to the Attendee Hub via the email this morning, and it may also still be open in your browser. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn this over to our presenter, Jordan Smelly.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Jordan Smelly. I'm a mental health peer specialist here in Texas, but I also have intellectual and developmental disabilities due to a genetic syndrome called Chung-Jensen syndrome. So with that being said, I'll share my screen and get started. All right, so overview of potential support needs for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So the key purpose of the presentation. So for the purpose of this presentation, IDD will stand for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities with or without co-occurring mental health and or substance use diagnosis. Key objectives. The first objective is to define intellectual and developmental disabilities. Understanding of the prevalence of IDD in Texas alone, and understanding the importance of keeping potential support needs in mind for individuals with IDD. So what is intellectual and developmental disabilities? According to the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, intellectual and developmental disabilities is defined as differences that are usually present at birth and that uniquely affect the trajectory of the individual's physical, intellectual, and or emotional development. Many of these conditions affect multiple body parts or systems. And that would be the link that takes you directly to the page with that definition on the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development website. Now, I will say that I am appreciative of their staff. I've been collaborating with them on updating this definition to be more person-centered, as well as what had used the word disorders But I know for myself, and I know other members of the intellectual and developmental disabilities community, don't see ourselves as having a disorder. We see ourselves as having unique differences. So this was a major accomplishment, and I'm appreciative of the National Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development for having the open mind and willingness to update their definition. So what is the prevalence of IDD in Texas? According to the Texas Workforce Commission, the number of Texans with intellectual and developmental disabilities is 485,000. And that would be the link to their Twitter page to the post with this information. So there's 485, and that's just here in Texas. That does not include within the US or worldwide. So what are some examples of intellectual and developmental disabilities? ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Asperger's, which is included in autism spectrum disorders in the DSM. Autism spectrum disorders, there's still a community within the autism community. There's a group that keep, from my understanding, Asperger's separate from autism. So they don't feel that Asperger's is part of autism. Cerebral palsy, Charcot-Marie-Tooth, Chang-Jansen syndrome, which is what I have, Down syndrome, dysgraphia, dyslexia, and for those of you that aren't sure the difference between those two is dyslexia is more about the ability to read words and the letters get mixed up sometimes, and then dysgraphia has more to do with spelling. Intellectual disability, Fragile X syndrome, which means that your gender chromosome is XXY instead of just XX or XY. Juvenile diabetes, Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as ALS, Mowat-Wilson syndrome, muscular dystrophy, Prader-Willi syndrome, spina bifida, Tourette syndrome, and then written expression disorder, which I know might sound like something that's made up, but it is an actual disorder. Written expression disorder, people who have written expression disorder struggle to put their ideas into writing. They also make frequent mistakes in grammar and punctuation. Then the important thing to keep in mind about those who have written expression disorder is written expression disorder often co-occurs with other learning challenges. Two of the most common are dyslexia and ADHD. And another very important thing to understand about written expression disorder is people don't outgrow written expression disorder. It's lifelong, and it is caused by differences in the brain. So those that have written expression disorder, they could go to all of the schooling in the world, they could have the greatest tutor in the world, but they're still going to have some struggles around using proper grammar and punctuation. And this is the link that I pulled that definition from. So what are some examples of possible support needs? So for some people with IDD, having multiple people talk at the same time, it can be very overwhelming. For myself, this is one of the support needs I have, because what happens for me and for some other individuals with IDD is when more than one person at a time starts talking, it can overwhelm us to the point that our body actually goes into what's called fight or flight mode. And when you're in fight or flight mode, you're not really able to process information. This is where people, you might see them interrupt with anger, or they might just disappear if you're in an online meeting. So please keep in mind that for some people with IDD, they can only handle hearing one person talk at a time. Another possible support need is only one subject matter presented at a time. This is ironically another one of my support needs, and what this looks like is for me, when I go through things or I'm in a training, I have to have one idea presented at a time, and then I need a verbal and or visual cue, visual cue that we're changing subject. Because again, for some people like myself who have IDD, if you're jumping from topic to topic, some of us have processing struggles like myself. And so it's hard for us to process one topic, especially if it's extremely new to us, but trying to jump topics, it again can be very overwhelming to us, to the point that we're in flight or fight mode, we're overstimulated, we're trying to figure out if we are really safe. And so, if you're trying to present multiple topics and someone is there that has intellectual and or developmental disabilities, and they're not really able to handle multiple topics, then they're not going to get the point you're trying to make or what you're trying to teach. Because while you're jumping topics, they're in their brain just trying to figure out whether or not they're safe. So use of visual aids. So for some people with IDD, just trying to tell them how to do something, or instructions. If it's verbal, it's not really going to work that well. So some examples of visual aids could be a diagram. It could be written instructions, or it could be a worksheet, a video. We'll get more into visual aids here in a minute. Copies of notes. So for some people with IDD, and this is especially true for me, it's hard enough for me when I'm in a training, or when I was in school, it was hard enough to pay attention to the instructor. And trying to write notes was extremely overwhelming for me at times, partly because I also have written expression disorder. And so it'd be like, I'm trying to take notes, but at the same time, pay attention to what's being said, and it can be overwhelming. And so, by having access to a copy of someone's notes, or if it's a presentation slide or a PowerPoint presentation, having a copy of the PowerPoint slides really helps support us, because then we either will have access to classmates' notes. So if we missed something that we felt was a very important thing for us to remember, we actually have it written down. Or if it was a PowerPoint presentation, we actually have a copy of the PowerPoint slides to go back and reference. And if we missed something that was on a slide, it's okay, because we know we already have it. And so if there was something we didn't have enough time to jot down, our anxiety doesn't get as triggered if we have a copy of the slide, because then we know, well, okay, it's okay that the instructor or trainer has moved on, because I have a copy of the slides, and I can just go back and write down what I missed. And again, we just talked about this, copies of slides used in a presentation, along with the recording of the presentation, so notes can be made on hard copy of slides if needed. So along with having a copy of notes, or a copy of the PowerPoint slides, for some individuals with IDD, including myself, having a copy of a recording of the presentation is also helpful, because again, we won't feel as under pressure or anxious about writing something down, because we know we can go back and watch the recording again. And if there was something that we missed, it's okay, because it's recorded and we can go back and review it. Ability to record lectures. And for some people with IDD, visual recordings are better, and for others, the audio recording is better. It just really kind of depends on the person. I know when I was in college, having the ability to voice record lectures while I was in class was very helpful, because then I had everything, and I could just go back and listen to the recording, which helped me with making notes or making index cards of key terms, or just being able to just listen to it over and over, which helped me understand the material. Communication assistance. So for some people with IDD, some people are what is called nonverbal, meaning that they really don't have the ability to speak, but that doesn't mean that they are unable to communicate at all. And that's something that is very important for those of you that are here to understand. For some people with IDD, their communication style may not be verbal. It might be action-based. For example, a few summers ago, I interned at a summer camp for children with special needs. And we had a camper who was autistic and nonverbal. And the group had gone bowling, and some stuff had gone down at the bowling alley. And when they came back to the location we were having camp at, the autistic camper that's nonverbal actually went into the room we had the TV in that had the DVD player, and they actually started pushing the buttons, which of course triggered some of the other campers because they were wanting to watch the movie. And we tried to get the camper to sit down and watch the movie, but they would keep messing with the buttons. And so, ironically, shortly after we kind of pulled them out of the room because they wouldn't stop messing with the buttons, their ride showed up, their guardian. And we learned from the guardian that the way this particular camper tries to communicate that they don't feel in control or they're not feeling safe is they actually take control over something that they can have control over. So in this instance, taking control over the DVD player and like making the movie go forward or backwards or pause or stop or play, that was that camper's way of trying to communicate that they were not okay. And so, another example is I have a best friend who has Down syndrome, and he would be considered mostly nonverbal. And the way I kind of understand what he needs is he kind of is through his actions. For example, he enjoys playing Wii football with me. And so when he wants to play on the Wii, he actually brings me one of the Wii remotes. When he's ready to eat lunch or dinner, as ridiculous as this may sound, he'll actually flap his arms like a chicken wings to communicate that he is hungry and wants to eat either lunch if it's lunchtime or dinner if it's around dinner time. And so it's not everyone communicates verbally. Some people communicate through action. I've also seen some people that for whatever reason, they're nonverbal, and they also use what's called a SGD, speech generating device. So it's that kind of looks like a tablet, and when they punch it, they can actually spell out words together, and then they hit what's the equivalent of an enter on a keyboard, and then the device reads the whole sentence, and that's how they communicate. So just remember, not all communication is verbal. Short list of verbal directions or tasks. So for some people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, if you try and give them a long list of verbal directions or tasks, it can either be they just feel overwhelmed because of the vast amount of information, and that's just very overwhelming to them, or they'll try and do their best, but because you gave so many instructions, they'll probably leave one or two out. And if that happens, then, they feel kind of frustrated when you point it out. And then it's kind of important, if you're noticing that you're giving kind of a lengthy list of directions, and it appears the individual is having a hard time with remembering every single step, that is probably a very good sign that they have a support need of a short list of verbal directions or tasks. And then for other individuals with IDD, myself included on this one in particularly, written list of directions or tasks is really the best way to support us, because again, we do our best to listen and we do our best to complete the directions or tasks, but if they aren't written down, then there's a chance we'll forget about them. And then sometimes that'll lead to individuals that gave us those tasks or directions getting frustrated with us because we forgot something. And then of course that leads to us feeling frustrated because we forgot something. And so, sometimes having a written list of directions or tasks is a support need. All right, my first example of what a visual aid could look like. This is actually one of the visual aids I was given to help me at my current job, which is a mental health peer specialist. So it's the steps to problem solving handout. So the diagram goes like this. You define the problem, then you list all available options, good or bad, just whatever options you can think of. Then consider the consequences of each option. Then you choose the best option and act on it. And then, of course, you evaluate the outcome. And the way that looks is like this. So step one, what is the problem? So you would write down the problem. And then step two, list all your options. So for example, let's say the problem was, I'll use an example of me. So one problem I had was my job was not understanding that I have to have one subject presented at a time. And then when it's time to switch to another subject, I need a verbal and or visual cue so that I understand we've completed this subject. Now we're on to the next one, because that really helps me not feel overwhelmed. So the problem is my job not understanding I need one subject presented at a time. So list all your options. So of course, one option could be I could just quit my job. I could yell at my boss about not feeling supported. I could yell at my coworkers. I could, take a minute and calmly explain to my job that, for me, because of my processing issues, it's really important that I have one subject presented at a time, and that when it's time to move on from that subject, if it's during a training and it's like the same training, same day, then I need a visual or verbal cue so that I understand we've gone from this subject to the next one. So that way I'm not processing it as we're jumping around on topics or subjects, which then would trigger me and I would feel overwhelmed. And then I'm not able to process. And when I can't process, I'm not learning anything you're trying to teach me. And it just creates a huge ordeal. So then after you list all your options, you consider the consequences. And there's something called expected behaviors for that environment and unexpected behaviors for that environment. So expected behavior for my job would be calmly letting them know that, I really need one subject presented to me at a time. And when we're done with that subject and we're going to move on to another one and it's in the same training, I need a visual and or audible cue so that others able to understand we're switching gears, basically, so that I don't feel overwhelmed. And the next column is other people had this thought. So this would be, so I just advocated for my support need. So the other people would probably think, wow, Jordan really understands his support need. He's communicated with us what he needs. And now we need to decide how we can support him. And then the next column, of course, is other people felt this way. So of course they kind of felt impressed that I was able to communicate very specifically what I needed. And then of course what happened is they took into consideration of my support need of one subject at a time is what I need. And when we switch subjects in the same training, I need a visual or audible cue. And so they try their best to do that now. And then of course, I felt ending up pretty good about myself, because it was like, even though they did something that was very triggering to me, I was able to advocate in a manner that they listened and they were willing to do their best to support me. And then you have the unexpected behaviors for that environment. So let's say this might be, I could yell at my job about them not supporting me how I need with just the one subject at a time. So if I was just like yelling at my boss and saying very inappropriate words to them, then the thought they would probably have is, Jordan's done lost his mind. Or, you know, maybe we made a mistake hiring him because they knew about my disabilities because I disclosed on my first day. And so they might think, well, maybe we ended up making a mistake because he's not as mature as we thought he would be. And then, of course, if I'm yelling at them and saying bad things, they probably feel uncomfortable or frustrated or angry, or like, I don't have to deal with this. And so what would probably happen is I would probably lose my job, more than likely. And then I would feel really bad about that, because it's like I was trying to get support, but yet I wasn't able to do it in a way where they understand all I was looking for is support. And so you kind of map out which, if the option is expected or unexpected, and then now you're at step 4, which is choose an option that will have the best outcome. So of course, in case y'all haven't figured out, of course I chose the just calmly explain to my job my support need around one subject at a time, please. And if we're gonna go to another subject in the same training, to try and have a visual or audible cue so that I'm not processing it as jumping around topics, and which triggers me, and then I'm overwhelmed and I'm not gonna learn what you want me to or need me to learn. And of course, the evaluation of how that choice worked out for me, it worked out great, because my job was understanding. They kind of asked, well, how can we support you? And it was basically a combination of, please, just one topic at a time, and please, no more than one person talking at a time, and let's finish the subject before moving on to the next one, because bouncing around is overwhelming to me. And, you know, I feel that my work felt impressed and willing to support me, because I was able to stay calm and explain my support needs without being demanding. And I ended up feeling really good, because now when I go to trainings, I'm not getting overwhelmed as often. Like, actually almost never now that I've actually taken the time to speak up and let them know my support need. They've been able to kind of rearrange how they do our trainings to where it's not so overwhelming to me. And of course, it was a good decision. And then what did I learn? I learned that if I calmly advocate for my support need, then my employer or whoever it is I'm advocating to is probably going to be more willing to do the best they can to support me. But I also have to understand that we're all human, and sometimes mistakes will happen, but that doesn't mean that they've stopped. That doesn't necessarily mean that they've stopped being willing to support me, so long as I was able to do it calmly and professionally. And then another tool I have been given, and this is a visual aid that could work, it's called the 5-point scale. This was developed by two ladies. The first one's named Kari Dunn, Buron, MS, Autism Education Specialist, and Mitzi Curtis, MsEd, Autism Resource Specialist. And then the www.5pointscale.com is Kari Buron's website. And I was actually able to speak with Kari via email this week. And I told her I would like to use the 5-point scale you developed in my presentation this Friday. And I explained to her, that I have IDD and that my presentation is on an overview of potential support needs for individuals with IDD. And she was very supportive of me using her scale. And this was actually the information she provided me and asked me to use in my presentation to give her and her co-creator credit. So let me click on this. So this is my anxiety level while at work scale. So this is a scale of 1 to 5. So 1's being green, so meaning everything's good, and 5 typically means explosion. So for me, for my anxiety when I'm at work, if I'm at a 1, and so you have a rating and then look and sound like, so I go in and I kind of briefly describe what each number looks like for me, the feeling that I have, and then of course the last column is I can try to, and I list some tools that I can try to help me remember, because sometimes, especially when I get up in this area, it's really hard for me to remember some of my coping mechanisms I have. So for a 1, so like, in the green, when I'm in the green level, like 1, I'm smiling and I'm chill. I am able to focus and process information easily. So of course I'm feeling calm, and I don't really need to use any of my coping skills because I'm doing as good as possible. So then when I get to a 2, so I still typically have a smile on my face, but I'm a little less chill, and I'm still able to focus and process information fairly easy. Not as easily when I'm at a 1, but still pretty easily. But this is where I start to feel a little fidgety. And of course, some of my coping mechanisms are, I can get up and walk around the office. I could take a 5 to 10 minute break, or I could listen to music, but that doesn't mean for the rest of my shift. That means like maybe one or 2 songs. Then when I get up to a 3, this is where I typically start showing visual signs of frustration. This is where I start having trouble with focusing and processing information. This would be about when I start stumbling for words to express myself, and I may raise my voice level. And this is when I start feeling slightly overwhelmed. And some of my coping mechanisms are I can obtain assistance from coworker or supervisor. I could try taking a break, listening to music, do deep breathing, or again, I could get up and walk around the office, just kind of have a break from whatever has kind of triggered me. Then when I get to a 4, what this could look like is going from having my camera on to turning it off if in a virtual meeting at a random time for more than 30 seconds. So for some individuals with IED, and this includes me, when I'm in a virtual meeting and I start to really feel overwhelmed, it's not uncommon for, again, because when I get overwhelmed, I kick into fight or flight, and typically I choose flight. And so just turning my camera off is typically a sign that I am feeling overwhelmed. This is also where I'm unable to focus or process information. And I struggle with verbal communication at all, and I might raise my voice level. And of course, I feel overwhelmed, and I can do deep breathing or get help from my coworkers or supervisor. And then 5 is, if I ever get to a 5, that is not good, because I'm either like crying really bad or I am yelling, and that I feel extremely overwhelmed. And when I get to this point, I probably need to be calling one of my supports so that they can help me get to a 4 or lower, or attempt to try and speak with my supervisor privately. But that's kind of how I use the 5-point scale. But you can use it for pretty much whatever it is the person is like needing to communicate. Okay, when I'm good, this is what it looks like, versus when I've had too much. So it's kind of a way for those of us that might struggle with verbal communication when overwhelmed or triggered. It's a way for us to communicate to others where we are at, so they can understand what support we may need. All right, let me exit out of that. All right, so again, this was created by Kari, Dunn, Buron, and Mitzi Curtis. And there's the website where you can get more information on the 5-point scale. So finally, now we're going to talk about why is it important to keep individuals with IDD potential support needs in mind. First, it helps establish and maintain an environment where the individual or individuals feels included and supported. So, those of us with IED, we're just like everyone else. We want to feel supported and included in things. And so, by keeping some of these potential support needs in mind, it can help ensure that the environment we are in with you feels safe, and like we're included and supported. Because I can't tell you how many times I've been in environments where others know about my disabilities, and I don't feel supported because they either don't want to support me or they're just not doing it at all. One example I could give is some places that I go to play volleyball, sometimes I'll go, and when I play, there are times that people actually, when I play like setter or front row, they'll actually keep the ball away from me. And I actually wear leg braces, so I do have a little bit of a mobility issue, but not enough that I can't play. But there are times that I'll go, and instead of giving me the opportunity to set or hit the ball over, they always pass it to everyone else on the team. And when that happens, I definitely don't feel included or supported. And that's not fair, because just because I have, leg braces doesn't mean I should be treated differently. It doesn't mean that I should be excluded. And that goes for anyone with IDD. We don't deserve to be excluded or treated differently just because we might have some unique differences. Number 2, it decreases the chance of the individual's sensory system being overwhelmed, which can lead to a major increase in their anxiety level. So we've kind of touched on this throughout my presentation, and I can't stress enough to those of you that have attended that, for some individuals with IDD, and I'm kind of speaking about myself at the moment, when our anxiety increases, it's very draining on me. When my anxiety level gets super high, like if I'm always at a 5, I can't function. I just can't. It's too draining. I just cannot function if I'm constantly at a 5, because it just drains me. And, no one really deserves to always have their anxiety triggered to the point that they're having a major anxiety episode. It provides, number 3, provides the individual or individuals the opportunity to realize they can accomplish anything they put their mind to. So, back when I first started my recovery for IDD, which was roughly 6.5 years ago, I never saw myself presenting like I am today. I didn't see myself being able to have a job. I didn't see myself being able to have friends that genuinely cared about me. I didn't really see the potential, but as I started getting the supports that I really needed, I started to realize that, you know what, I can really do anything I put my mind to. I was able to get certified as a mental health peer specialist. I was able to get the accommodations I needed in order to pass that exam. I actually serve on Texas Health and Human Services Behavioral Health Advisory Committee. And within my first year of serving, I actually am also the co-chair of the BHAC. And so it's like, as I got the supports that I really needed, it became clearer and clearer that I really can't do anything I put my mind to, even though I do have struggles with processing information. I do sometimes struggle with written communication, or I struggle with the grammar or punctuation or spelling. But even though I have all these struggles, when I have the support I need, I feel pretty invincible, to be honest, and like, you know, anything's possible. Number 4, it helps support the individual or individuals in their recovery. And I kind of just touched on this. So, you know, I know recovery is typically thought of as either you're physically recovering from something, or you're recovering from a mental health crisis, or you're recovering from a substance use disorder. But people with IDD can actually recover too. And I'm actually kind of proof of that. And number 5, you know, keeping the potential support needs in mind for individuals with IDD can reduce the possibility of traumatizing and or re-traumatizing the individual or individuals. I can't really count on my hands the amount of times I have seen other individuals with IDD traumatized or re-traumatized because of the way they're treated, as well as myself. There have been times I've been traumatized or re-traumatized just because people don't want to support me. They don't want to take into consideration that, you know, yes, I'm different, but if I'm given the proper support, then I can participate just like you. I might do it a little differently, but I shouldn't, and other individuals with IDD shouldn't be constantly reminded about our differences. We should be reminded about our strengths. And with that, I will take questions as soon as I stop my screen share.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm Liz, and I'm really glad I came to hear your presentation. I have a question. I also know you, and I'm really proud of you to be here today. When you said that you'd only been in recovery for IDD for 6 years, I was really shocked because you're so high functioning. I also happen to work with him, for those of you who don't know that, and most of you don't know that. So 6 years. Why was just 6?
Yeah, sorry, that was me that did that with the recording. I didn't mean to. I saw the chat box. I saw someone post something in the chat box, so I was trying to click on chat to see what was posted, but apparently my mouse slipped over as I was trying to click, and so I accidentally clicked on the recording thing. But to answer Liz's question, 6.5 years, because most of my life I knew I had the mental health struggles, because that's something that I've had since growing up, but I actually didn't know about my genetic syndrome until 2017. So I wasn't officially diagnosed with IDD until 2019, about 4 years ago. So
What was it that you knew you had?
So I have ADHD, depression, anxiety, but I didn't know about my genetic syndrome until 2017, when I was diagnosed through very special genetic testing known as exome testing, which looks at the whole DNA sequence. And so my mental health recovery started in 2015, which is when the last time I was hospitalized for my mental health. And then when I got diagnosed with the Chang-Jansen syndrome, it kind of fit everything. So.
Thank you for explaining that. Just one other quick thing. Would you say that your service work and getting involved and being active like you are, has that made a difference? And I know you hinted on that during the presentation, but would you say it's really directly affected your wellness? I mean, in a big way?
Yeah, being involved in things, it's been pretty amazing what all I've gotten to participate in and what others have allowed me to participate in. And it really has helped my recovery because I'm staying busy, which for me is important for my stability. I know for other individuals, being as busy or involved as I am might be overwhelming, so it would have the opposite effect. But for me, it's actually really helped with my recovery.
Great, thank you.
And Jordan, we have a comment and question in the chat, some praise on your very thorough presentation, and wondering if ASL, American Sign Language, is a form of nonverbal communication that can be used to communicate with the IDD community.
Yes, I've actually seen that in, ironically, the project I'm involved with Liz. We have some people that are, they're either nonverbal, and so they use the chat box, or they're hard of hearing. And so we've had a few participants that actually use sign language. So it can be, but if you're gonna use that, you need to make sure whoever it is you're wanting to communicate with understands the American Sign Language. Because if not, they're probably just gonna be staring blankly at you and not understanding you're trying to communicate.
Gordon, I said Gordon, I meant Jordan. Flash Gordon, you're just a superhero to me. That's why I said. I just want to ask you, would you do a shameless plug for T4T and talk about, since it's a training for people with IDD?
Yeah, I can
Or do you
that.
think, I see our director's on, I wonder if she's hearing it and if she wants to talk about it. Because, you know, you started off as just being like a friend of the, you know, and then now you've become a part of it because you're so awesome, right? So.
Well, I'm
Yes.
so excited about what you just did, Jordan, in this presentation, and I'm so glad you have so many people listening in. And I would defer to you as to what you feel like doing. But thank y'all. Thank you, Jordan.
Thanks, Jill.
Yeah, I can touch on that in a minute, but I wanted to make sure there weren't any other questions first, because I'd hate to talk about that and run out of time and someone had a question.
I was just wondering what kind of education you had, because you seem so well educated. I love hearing your your presentation. So what kind of classes did you take when you were younger?
So I was in general ed, but I had a inclusion teacher, and then college just was not for me at the time I went through college, because back when I went through college, there was still a stigma around mental health, and so it wasn't really as acceptable to ask for help as it is now. And so, I mean, I kind of gone through workshops, and then of course, for the certification I hold, we have a training. But I've kind of just learned things on my own, and then I currently, so like the 2 visual aid documents I got those from a lady named Fran Templeton, who is at Fort Worth, and her company name is Neurodiversity Services, I believe. But she works with individuals that have autism. I haven't officially been diagnosed with autism, but the interesting thing about my genetic syndrome is it's not uncommon to have autistic-like characteristics or to have been diagnosed with autism before being diagnosed with Chung-Jensen syndrome. And so it's kind of more of, I kind of learned on my own, / I went through the required state training, because I held something called Peer Recovery Support Specialist first, PRSS, and then, as some of you know, we had House Bill 1486, which made peer support Medicaid billable. And from that, they created the Mental Health Peer Specialist certification and the Recovery Support Peer Specialist certification. And the difference between those two is the mental health peer specialist is, of course, those that have lived experience with mental health. And then the recovery support peer specialists are those that have the lived experience with addiction. And so it was kind of just going through required classes / finding trainings that were interesting to me / meeting and getting services from Fran Templeton.
Wow. How old are you, may I ask?
32.
Wow, what a life and what achievements you made. I'm really happy to have listened to you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Okay, are there any more questions before I kind of talk a little bit about T for T? So I know we got a couple of minutes left.
Nope, no questions in the chat. Just praise.
All right, so T for T stands for Training for Transformation, and it's a project funded by TCDD, and I think it's Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, I think. But it's a project funded by them through a nonprofit in Austin called Imagine Art. And what we're working on doing is creating a peer support pathway for individuals with IDD. And it's currently working out to look like more of a group-based peer support than one-on-one, but we still potentially will have something called channels for self-advocacy, or UBU, which is where an individual with IDD who might want some support with attending their annual meeting where they talk about their services, they can go to channels for self-advocacy or UBU and get support planning for their meeting. whether that's like trying to talk about what they're wanting and just kind of getting maybe some ideas, or maybe they want to role play certain situations, or maybe they just want someone to attend their meeting with them and just kind of be there for them. Like, not necessarily speak for them, not necessarily say anything, just kind of be there more or less physically for them. But that's kind of a brief look at the T for T project. If Teal wanted to add anything, she's more than welcome to.
Oh, I think that was great. So it's a level-based program where it's accessible and equitable, and individuals can join and practice giving and receiving peer support in a group that has like a comfort agreement and soft skills, basically, of connecting with one another that people are practicing. And then if they want to go on to what we call the level 3, they are joining the Channels for Self-Advocacy group, which will connect them with information and support that they need to troubleshoot and work through different challenges and advocate for themselves. And then the UBU is like a role play, like Jordan said. And then the idea is that individual could select a peer that they feel comfortable with to bring into any meeting that they would like to have that presence of another individual supporting them, possibly to help remind them they could work together to prepare. They can create a visual aid or whatever will help them to remember who they are and what they want to say when they're in their meeting about what's important to them. So just like Jordan was saying, instead of having that fight, flight, or freeze, having someone who you're comfortable with, who will help remind you who you are, what you wanted to say, and to self-advocate in that environment. So that's the project we're working on. It's been a great honor to work on it. It's been a great honor to work with Jordan, and Lizzie is here, and Juan is here, and I think that the members of the team. So we're really glad, and we get to meet Jordan for real in person on Sunday. And I'm really excited. We've got to know him virtually. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, Jordan, for offering me a moment. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Are there any other questions? That wanted to make sure if you had one, you had the opportunity to ask it, because I know we have like 2 minutes.
2 minutes. And don't forget to go back to the attendee hub and do the survey on Jordan's presentation, because it was amazing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I learned some stuff, and I've been in the field for 20-something years.
Oh, if y'all are interested in the forms, I think y'all can maybe get a hold of NAMI, or if you go back and watch the recording, on the last slide, I have my email address, and I can email them to y'all if anyone was interested in them.
One quickie, Jordan. I'd never heard of the syndrome you have until you told it to T4T. It's a name, it's a man's name, right?
No, so ironically, it's actually named after 2 female geneticists, Dr. Wendy Chung, who's at New York, Columbia University in New York, and Dr. Jansen, who is overseas in Netherlands. And it was called PHIP related disorder for the longest time. But then members within the Facebook group that I'm in for this syndrome got together and advocated for it to be named Chung Jansen in honor of Dr. Chung and Dr. Jansen, and that got accepted. So that's
You did
why
that
it's
too? Yeah.
Chung Jansen syndrome.
Chung
So it's technically Chung and then hyphen Jansen because
Jansen.
it's two doctors, two
And
geneticists.
I know they run out of time. In a thumbnail thing, wow, what is it again? How does it affect you? I know you explained us all this, but I was listening. But
So Chung Jansen, it's not really that understood still because it's pretty rare. I'm like one of 4 cases in Texas, and there's like now 215 people in the group I'm in. But it's kind of the way they understand, and Dr. Chung thinks it works, is it affects the brain, and so it affects the signals to the nerves and muscles, which is how come the fatigue is really common, because you're not getting the full signal from the brain. And then the ADHD is common, like I said, autistic characteristics. And then of course, because we can fatigue easier than most people, obesity is kind of very common characteristic. So it kind of, they don't fully understand it yet, except for it's common to have mental health stuff. It's common to show autistic characteristics, obesity, and all kinds of things. So it's just not that well understood yet. So I can't really definitively explain it any better than I just did, because the other thing I know is so far within the study Dr. Chung's doing, no one has the exact same mutation. So therefore, until they kind of can get to where you have more than one person with a particular mutation, it's going to be kind of difficult to understand how it affects someone. But that's what Dr. Chung's working on right now, is trying to create guidelines of care for people with Chung Jansen. It's just going to take time.
right, well, you're one of the case studies. You're actively helping them do that, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Your next session for everyone starts at 4:30. So be sure to go back to the attendee hub, take the survey for Jordan's amazing presentation, and thank you for participating in our NAMI Forward to Wellness conference. I'm going to go ahead and close this session. And Jordan, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.